You're about to listen to the Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders and for coders about all aspects of life as a developer.
I'm Will, the curmudgeonly experienced developer.
And I'm Beej, the optimistic newbie developer. Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast. Before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
Lots of things. You know, we're still cleaning up our code base at work and finding, how can I put this delicately, people's creative solutions to not understanding HTTP. I've seen some stuff that I'm trying not to be belligerent and hateful about the way that it was done. And it becomes a challenge because I can't get myself into the headspace of what they were thinking. It's stuff like you have a link from one web page to another. And when you go to the second web page, things where they're like, oh, you didn't pass this query string parameter, log you out.
What?
And you're just going, what? And you have to trace and try to figure out where the heck this happened. And it's just they go, oh, I don't want to deal with that. Just log them out in their session because we use the session state as a bag of holding. Huh. And yeah, so I'm cleaning up some stuff that's done in that manner, and I can't rationalize it. It's very tricky.
It makes me just,
stuff like that. I'm somewhat grateful in that the bar is set low.
Yeah,
because it's really easy to jump over it. But like I guess my programming paradigm tends to be try to get in the headspace of the person that wrote this and then go with that.
Well, remember what happened when I tried to get in a certain headspace?
Like match the dance moves, as it were.
Yeah.
Right? But this is a dance done by a double jointed octopus and you can't match it. Like there's, it's like I just don't even know what's going on here. So, that's what I'm dealing with, working on the book as well. Trying to actually be productive on that. I'm having a lot of difficulty at the moment because I find myself working. Like I come home from work and then I work again. We work, we drive, we work again. That kind of thing. And you end up in a cadence that's not particularly good when you're working from your home office. And I think I'm going to have to start going to a coffee shop a few times a week or something, just to get a change of scenery because I'm finding that I'm not very effective.
Well, let me know when you do that because I love working out at coffee shops.
Yeah, I mean, I just need to do something. I don't know what, but something's got to shift. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. I'm assuming a coffee shop will work okay, even though I have a crappy laptop battery. So I've got to find one that will let me plug in.
They all do. That's not an issue at all.
Okay. Well, it used to be.
It did. I remember when we were in college, that was a big issue.
Well, it wasn't even all that long ago. Just a couple of years ago, working on projects in coffee shops. And if you didn't get there at the right time and get where you could get plugs, you're just out of luck. There's a pub down here that has USB chargers for phones and stuff. And I'm just wondering, I'm like, if I go in during some random hour when nothing's going on, could I work?
Possibly. I have seen that. One of the places I like to hang out at, it's kind of like a community bar kind of place.
Yeah.
But you go at an odd hour and you'll see people in there because they have free Wi-Fi. You'll see people in there on the computers. Yeah.
And I wouldn't even need Wi-Fi. Actually, that's detrimental. I need to just be able to lock in on what I'm doing and do it. I find that I'm doing a whole lot of, I guess it's like patterns that I see when I'm depressed, but I'm not depressed as far as I'm concerned at the moment. Mm-hmm. It's just I'm not effective. I'm just kind of filling time, and I don't like that because I got a lot to do.
So it's like a change in scenery will kind of just jog that, all right, I'm here. I need to not waste my time while I'm here.
I need a change in scenery, and I need limited time.
Yeah.
Because you feel like you've got all the time in the world when you're working from home because you've had so much time. And so I've got to somehow figure out a better way to approach that. So anyway, what are you into?
Oh, well, speaking of working from home, I am, by the time this episode airs, I may already have switched completely over to Hexo. You got me into it with developing the theme for your site.
Which I still need to integrate into mine.
Yeah.
I'm, like I said, I'm not I'm not getting good traction
Yeah.
right now.
At the time of this recording, I have my theme completed, and I am in the process of going through my posts and just kind of getting all the images and everything.
There's so much, like I didn't think there would be so much detail. I'm having the same thing, and I'm going, why am I having such a hard time opening GIMP and resizing an image?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is my focus not there? And I don't know.
Well, part of my problem is my images are attached to my WordPress site. And so when I first migrated over, all the images work because they're still on my WordPress site in that size. And so they're just calling to the WordPress site. I didn't really realize, speaking of having an internet connection, I didn't realize I needed to go in and adjust that. And this is just a mental block on my part until I was up at my grandmother's house who doesn't have internet access.
Yeah.
And my font didn't work. My images didn't work. What really threw me off was my columns weren't working. I could not, for the life of me, figure out why my sidebar kept going to the bottom of the page until it clicked after 3 hours of messing around with the stylus and CSS that
your style sheet didn't come down.
Yeah. I was using Bootstrap and I wasn't getting Bootstrap, and I'm like, I feel so stupid because I have Bootstrap on my machine. Like, I downloaded Bootstrap just for this situation. It just didn't click.
Yeah.
Until that point. Of course, once I figured that out, I got so productive for like the next 2 or 3 hours. It wasn't funny.
I got so productive. Yeah. I was so furious that it didn't work. Let's be honest what that is here.
Yeah. Well, I got a lot done. And then when I got home the next day, I got on and was able to really get everything set up just right. But I've put a lot of effort into making the Hexo theme look almost identical to my WordPress theme. And there's a few minor things, some that I changed on purpose, some because it was easier to do in Hexo and I just didn't feel like really putting the effort into making it exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, plus, the limitations of a WordPress theme, like once you don't have those.
Oh, yeah.
It's mighty hard to convince yourself that I want to go to extra effort to be hamstrung.
Oh, yeah. The changes I've made, they're not like huge overt changes, but they're small changes that just, in my opinion, they look amazing with the theme that I've set up. And once I get that theme to where it can be used beyond just my particular hard coding in my information, it will be available for anyone out there.
Yeah, if somebody wants to send you some money.
Yes.
That's a way to do that.
Or if you would like
contribute to the Complete Developer Podcast Beer Fund.
Yeah. If you would like a custom theme for your site in Hexo or Jekyll or pretty much any JavaScript based theme. While I'm not a strict JavaScript developer, I've developed yours. Another client of mine has gone to the Hexo platform, so I developed her theme and my own. So I've got some experience with it, and I'm willing to put together a proposal for anyone that's interested. But with that said, speaking of JavaScript, our good friend that does our audio and wrote our music is a JavaScript developer. So let's roll that glorious music. This week for IoTs, well, I got something specially for you. This is based on something you had talked about a couple of weeks ago. I stole this from one of both of our favorite podcasts that we like to listen to, .NET Rocks. This is a Kickstarter success story built by graduate students from the University of Illinois. It was even featured at Maker Faire in 2014. And that is the Circuit Scribe pen.
Okay.
It is a conductive ink pen. They're about $20 each, or you can buy them in bundles for $5, I think is like about $95, and then $10 for $180. So, the more you buy, you get a little discount. You can use it on any surface, and it works like a rollerball pen. It writes out conductive silver ink, 60 to 200 meters based on the surface and speed. You can't use it as much on more absorbent surfaces like napkins. You won't get as much out of it. Really, it's best for use on photo paper. You can even erase it on photo paper and scratch it off. You can even solder to the ink. That's for pro solderers, not for you.
Yeah, I won't say I'm terrible at soldering. I will say there's probably somebody that's worse. Probably. I'm not good at it. It's a skill that I keep meaning to work on, but I haven't reapproached it. And
we've got some projects coming up that I've got lined up for us in the next few months that will help with that. But it's just a really cool product. That's over at circuitscribe.com. I think it's awesome that this started out as a graduate project and turned into a business.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just...
I like that idea. I mean, I like that progression because getting things... Like, academia is really good at coming up with ideas.
Yeah.
But being able to transition that from a abstract thought to an actual business proposition is very difficult. And I really like it when I see that happen.
Yeah. I agree. And I think one thing that I like is this is a Kickstarter success. And things like GoFundMe and Kickstarter, that's what they were there for, is for those ideas to get out there and to really
get the places where stuff happens, where you make stuff happen.
Yeah. And I mean, not everybody that's on there is successful, but I think this is a really cool thing. It fits into IoTs perfectly. And I just say, hey, congrats, and encourage more people and more students out there to give this kind of stuff a try. Nice.
So what are we talking about this week?
This week, we have a little rant.
A little rant?
A little, by my definition.
Because if there's one thing that we don't do well here is little rants. If we rant, it's big.
All right, well, this is a follow-up on your episode on technical writing, but it is specific to documenting software. And I want to start off with a quote, and then I'll get into kind of the reason that I put this episode together. First off, the quote, documentation allows you to transfer the why behind code.
And I want to add something to this here, which is probably the most metal statement that you're ever going to hear about computer documentation. Writing things down is how the dead communicate with the living.
Party on, Garth.
No, I mean, I'm 100% serious. Like, if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, what happens to the software project you're working on? Think about that. Like, how do I leave a message in a form that can be understood after I'm not here, right? Like, you don't want somebody to have to get out a Ouija board to try to figure out how to connect to your API.
Oh, no, you just do like Sting and leave a message in a bottle.
Hope someone gets my... Never mind. Yeah, that's not going to work.
All right, guys. So a little story behind this episode.
Oh, and you were so mad when this started.
Yeah, he remembers this. I was consulting on a WordPress site because apparently I'm the WordPress guru.
That's right, because that's how I market you, because otherwise it's me.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be the WordPress insultant anymore.
Yeah. So I was consulting on a WordPress site, and the theme documentation.
Was that on She Who Shall Not Be Named?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. This is, of course...
the wife of He Who Shall Not Be Named. She's working on some books, and she's a pretty freaking awesome author.
Yes, she is.
And drastically underestimates herself, and it's like... I want to see this. I want to see her have to confront the fact that she's awesome, because I think when that happens, it's going to be fantastic.
She had bought this theme for authors, and it was a really nice theme, but she wanted specific plugins the way that the demo had it on their website.
I heard all about this, by the way.
The theme documentation was password protected.
Yeah.
Like, the documentation that said, this is the plugin that we used for the slider. This is the plugin that we used for this.
Yeah.
The free plugin that we used for this.
It's like, why wouldn't you...
Really?
Yeah. And so this is why B just putting this episode together, and it really makes a lot of sense. Like, I'm seeing a lot of the same frustration with stuff that I use, because it's like the more expensive the component is, the more they actually give you docs to be able to use it, because they figured out that, hey, the point of this is to get people to use this and pay to be able to use it, not make them pay for docs.
Yes.
You know,
I mean, we wasted quite a few hours trying to figure out exactly what she wanted, because he who shall not be named is the one that's writing or that's building the page, and I was just kind of consulting. I was just there to answer questions and help out.
I mean, yeah, well, she could have had the whole thing cheaper, but she didn't ask.
I told her to.
Yeah.
But anyways, so you guys also know, if you've been listening, that I recently won the Infragistics Ultimate License. It's just like Will said, their documentation is completely open. Before I was able, after I found out I won, but before I was able to download it and enter the product key and stuff like that, I was able to look at their documentation and read through it. So as soon as I got it, I could start using it. There's
almost a parabolic curve, because when software is really cheap, the documentation is hard to get. Mm-hmm. And then you get to the middle of the curve and it's like, oh yeah, we got lots of docs because we want to grow. And then you get to the really expensive end and it goes away again.
Really?
Yeah, because they're trying to sell consulting services.
Where do you see the middle? Because
you're at the middle. If it's $2,500 a year, that's the middle to low end.
Okay, so I was gonna say, because I'm looking at this and I'm going, so there's password protection on docs for $100 product.
Yeah,
but easy open access for anyone to get docs on the $2,000 product.
Right, and then some of the stuff I'm dealing with at work that was initially, I think, $18K a year.
That's
I've had to reverse engineer obfuscated JavaScript, and I can, or we could pay for consultants, which we're not going to do, because I just don't care.
Yeah,
I'm going through this wall, and they can get out of the way. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so there's that kind of curve there.
Okay, I kind of see what you're saying there.
But most people are to the middle and left.
Yeah,
like that. It's what do they call it? Leptokurtotic? I forget what the statistical term is. It's where the median of the curve is not
at the actual middle.
Yeah. Of course, it also depends on how big the graph is.
That's true. That's true. Another thing that I've kind of I've been dealing with is that really a lot of open source docs are lacking in content.
Yeah. If you want to help with open source, write docs.
Yeah. Especially if you're a junior developer. I mean, you want to get some experience that
gets you credibility quickly. Mm-hmm. And it gets you contacts with people. I really think that this is a sleeper strategy for actually getting some community credibility.
Oh, yeah.
So people, just look into that a little bit.
I was looking for details on API references, and all I could find in the documentation was how to install it.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Because once they got that you're hooked.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas you have others like Microsoft's MSDN.
Can I get on a small short rant here?
Oh yeah, this is a rant episode, so go for it.
MSDN, guys, why is it okay to leak memory? I want to read one. I want a sample from you guys on anything that uses unmanaged resources that doesn't leak file handles, database handles, open sockets. I want to see this one time from you. Okay? Because here's the problem. I've made a career of cleaning up other people's crap code.
Yeah.
And invariably, when I see something that is horrific, that leaks file handles, that leaks database connections, that basically is not doing basic memory management the way .NET does it, I can copy that code and paste it into Google search. And the first thing that comes up is MSDN, and they copied it from you. Why you doing this to me, bro?
I can't argue, because I have looked stuff up on MSDN, and the issue I have is that
they're simplifying it.
Yeah, the thing is, their documentation in general tends to be verbose and troublesome to navigate because there's so much.
Well, and it's also generated from XML comments.
Yeah.
Because, that's a bad way to generate documentation, because, first of all, comments that stay long enough in code become lies. Mm-hmm. Always. The second thing is the person that's writing the code right now trying to make it work, like making them switch to documentation mode while they're writing it is going to make one or the other messed up, and you're testing the code.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So you're putting a moral hazard out there for somebody, and people succumb to moral hazards. Mm-hmm. That's why, particularly psychopathic individuals put moral hazards out there.
Yeah.
It's because they work.
So one that I have found, and you guys have heard me over the last few months sing the praises of this particular platform, but one that I found that really is really good is Hexo's default landscape theme.
Yeah.
Their readme.md file is concise yet detailed. It gets straight to the point, and I was able to base the themes that I created. I was able to understand Hexo.
Yeah. Provided you actually read the docs, as opposed to what I did, which was assume that, hey, docs are crap everywhere, so these probably are too, and then not read them. That's a little embarrassing, but that's what happened.
I'll be honest, I've been impressed with a lot of the docs I found, because I've gone through since then and read through a lot of the Node modules, the README files and the docs in there. There's some really...
Yeah, they've made sure that people can actually use their software.
Yes.
It's amazing what happens when somebody freaking cares. And there's a certain point, like, you become jaundiced and you have an expectation that is very low.
Yes.
And when somebody doesn't meet that and they actually do well, it breaks your game. And, the Hexo docs are like that because they've done a very solid job. And there's other open source projects that have done that. Structure Map with .NET that Jeremy Miller has done a very very good job. There's a few others that are like that, but most of them are just horrific as far as...
I'll tell you what really gets me with Hexo docs is the guy, is it Tony Chen? He's Chinese.
Yeah.
And the English Hexo docs are phenomenal.
Yeah. It's like, okay, you have somebody that probably learned the language as a second language.
Yeah.
And they're getting it right, and native speakers aren't. There's a point where the excuse disappears. And he just made that point. Mm-hmm. And there's a few others like that. I mean, it happens with Linux the same way. Like Linus Torvalds and that bunch, they do build fairly comprehensive documentation about how the kernel works. Like if you really get in there.
Oh yeah. Like I was thinking.
The nice thing about that is I get in there and I'm like, hey, I'm over my head. It doesn't matter.
I don't remember if I said
it's all magic.
Yeah. I don't remember if I said this when we were recording or before we were recording, but I said the only problems I've had with Linux were things that I just didn't know yet.
Yeah.
Because after switching over to Linux, it's like it's a learning curve thing.
Yeah.
And that's the only issues. So moving on, before we get into the meat of the episode, one last quote, and this is from Kathy Sierra in a presentation she did. If you want them to RTFM...
You better FM.
Yes. Make a better FM.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what that means...
read the...
effing.
Manual.
Yeah.
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 Not to get to PG or to worse than PG, but if
that's what
something
it means.
doesn't exist, nobody's looking at it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fundamental fact of matter.
So starting off, why write software documentation? You're going to be using your code in 6 months.
Yeah, and you're going to want to be able to quickly recalibrate yourself to whatever your thought process is.
You don't want to have to take the time to get back into that mindset. With good documentation, you don't have to. Like the point here is to be able to get into that mindset without having to go through all the code to get into that mindset.
Yeah, and another thing is other people are going to have to be able to contribute to your code. Like if you go on vacation or you get hit by a bus or you leave the company or whatever, like you're not present, other people have to be able to handle this. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the point of documentation. It goes back to the totally metal thing I sasaid about, this is how the dead talk to the living, is documentation. Like, I mean, I've done a lot of reading of the myths from Sumeria. Okay. Yeah. You realize somebody wrote that down like a really long time ago, like millennia ago, and I'm able to read that. That's a ghost of Christmas past, as it were, giving me a gift.
Yeah,
and that person would be unable to communicate with me right now.
Well, yeah.
Other than by writing it down, because
you don't speak dust.
Well, yeah, and I don't speak Sumerian.
Yeah.
Somebody was able to write it down, and then somebody was able to translate it, and I'm able to read it. Like
that's true. That's true. Like,
and this is true even of programming projects. Like if the person is gone, the artifact that's left is the documentation. If you don't have that, you better get the person, and then you have to pay the person to show up.
Well, think of it like this. I'm a big Shakespeare fan. All right, he wrote down his plays, or somebody did. He would be shocked
by how we are feeding his dirty jokes to school children, by the way.
Oh, that's very true. But anyways, his plays were written down. Had they not been written down and documented,
they'd be gone.
All we would have would be stories of people that saw the play.
Yeah, at best.
Yeah, and that's if that survived.
And that's somewhat okay for cultural continuity. It doesn't work very well when it's, okay, here's the system that makes me the money that I use to feed my family. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't, as far as failure modes, that's pretty awful. And you don't want to be there.
And lastly, under why, it improves your ability as a writer and as a coder.
Yeah, because if you can explain how the system works, you can understand it well enough to write it. Sometimes when you write the documentation, you figure out what's wrong with your system, too.
Yeah, that's true. And it's also one of those things that you learn more by teaching. So next, who is your audience?
Yeah, and this is a big thing. We talked about this in a previous episode. I think it's previous to this one. Because you have multiple people potentially listening, and the problem is that you shape communication based off of who the listener is.
Exactly.
And so you need to understand who they are, because if they're a technical user, like if they're another programmer, they're going to need to know what the important files are. They're going to need to know what functions and subroutines, or what particular objects, on up the chain. They're going to need to know, where variables, that are configuration type stuff is held.
Structure, the API references.
What it's tied into as far as third-party pieces.
Yeah.
Like, all those things have got to be there, and they've got to be able to figure out. Those have to be discoverable. Sometimes your documentation is, by the way, I'm using a language that enforces documentation. Mm-hmm. Right? Because, like, if you're referencing some header file somewhere, like, that's in your code.
Yes.
Sometimes that's somewhat self-documenting, particularly if you have a system that pulls that out and puts it in a format where it's searchable. Like that's still documentation, even though you're not writing it.
That's true. That's true. I mean, and then other times you're going to have end users that are non-technical end users, or
they're not technical in that particular field. They're wrapping whatever you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And sometimes the reasons for the documentation could be to assist in marketing, to enhance the company image, reduce technical support costs.
Well, and that could be a really big one. At work right now, we're dealing with, I won't say we're dealing with a lot of issues around tech support, but there's a lot of opportunities for reducing the amount of crap that tech support has to deal with.
Yeah.
Because, this is people's time. And if we can make it where their job is easier and more straightforward, and part of that is documentation for them and for the end user. Yeah. We can make them more effective, which means we can do more things with the staff that we have.
Well, like you that's less staff that your company has to have as tech support, but that also saves your clients money.
Yeah.
So that's more money that they can spend on your products.
Yeah, or they can be more prosperous.
Yeah. I just think of that means they can buy more from me because I am pure capitalist.
Right, but the other thing here too is it's not even a pure capitalism thing. Like, if your clients are successful, like, it takes a lot of work to land a client.
Oh, yes, it does.
And if they're still around 15 years hence and they still like you,
oh, that's a big thing.
Like, it doesn't have to be an upsell necessarily in how much they spent with you. It's just the fact that hey, they're still here. Really, honestly, documentation and setting people up to fall into the pit of success is a bigger part of that than the actual code is.
Yeah.
Because you can have some pretty atrocious code, because I've seen some that runs very critical systems, and you're like, this code is absolute garbage, but it's running critical systems and people understand how it works.
Yeah.
Even if they understand the pitfalls. Like, you'd be amazed at the stuff people will put up with as long as it's consistent and they understand it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's a certain point where if you don't have your ducks in a row, like you don't do the documentation, the client has the assumption that you did not do your due diligence.
Yes.
And even if you're right, you look wrong.
Exactly. So the big thing here is get a sense of who your audience is. And I read a really great blog post that talked about this. It will be included in the show notes. But it basically kind of listed 3 big things. And the first one was look at their job titles. Like, what are the job titles of the people that are using your code? Is it going to be, people that have the job title of system administrator and things like that? Or is it, look at who is using it based on their job title. You can kind of get a feel for what their level of technical knowledge is. And
of what metaphors you should use.
Yes, exactly. The next was interview the potential users. I heard this just today listening to Coding Blocks, a podcast that I listened to. They were talking about going around and, as a consultant, going and talking to the people that that are going to be using the code that you write. Of course, they were joking about when you go and talk to these people, telling them, I'm not here to automate your job and put you out of a job.
Yeah.
But
well, the other thing is just bouncing ideas off of them and making sure that what you wrote is actually understandable.
Yeah. And sometimes talking to those people, you'll find out things like the way they use the software. It's like,
what the project manager never said because they didn't actually look.
Yeah. Or you get in there and you talk to them and you're like, oh, I can make your job so much easier with like 2 lines of code that I didn't know about before.
Yeah.
And they all kind of said that on that podcast. And so,
and if you ever do that, it makes you look so good to management. Like it's a damage multiplier that cannot be underestimated.
Yeah. And finally, look at the existing documentation. See how that's written, the tone.
Unless it's really, really bad, most of the time keeping the same tone is a lot easier and a lot less jarring to the user.
Yeah.
Because one thing you don't want to do is surprise people. Because people get offended when they get surprised. When it's what they expected, it's...
Even if you want to change the tone, I would say do it subtly.
Yeah.
Like, ease them into it. And then lastly, under end users, kind of know the difference between a reference manual versus a user's guide.
Yeah, because the user's guide is intended to get the space shuttle off the ground and get it into the air, whereas a reference manual is intended to handle every situation that the space station could run into so that it doesn't fall back onto the Earth. Those are 2 very, very different things, and if you treat them as the same,
I love that analogy.
You're going to have a burning fireball, one way or another.
That's a great analogy. That wasn't in anything that I read, but that makes more sense to me than everything that I read working on this.
Well, I mean, like going off on a little bit of a weird tangent here. The point of most documentation is writing useful metaphors, right? Like the understanding of a metaphor is it's something that carries meaning.
Yes.
Well, who carries the meaning? Well, it's the party that's reading it, right? So I build the thing that they can carry.
Yeah. Sometimes you will have a combination of the 2, where your end user is a technical user. Specifically, if you're writing software.
APIs.
Yeah, APIs. That's, yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean, that's pretty much, at some level, you're going to be doing that.
You also have certain things that have standards, like .NET, Java,
OData.
Yeah, OData. And they kind of set what and where you can put your documentation.
Yeah, and it's a set of expectations.
Yeah. So next, we're going to start off with a look at some different formats and scopes of documentation. Now, this is going to be kind of brief, but we're just kind of hit kind of what each one is. First is the overview, and that would be like your README file. in GitHub or Bitbucket documentation.
Yeah, and the next would be step-by-step tutorials. So it's like your getting started guide, the bare minimum thing that works, and actually a demonstration of what the project is, like how you would build something with it.
Yeah, that's like quick and easy, just to kind of the get you started stuff.
Yeah, because it's amazing what that feedback loop does. It's like, okay, I put this thing together and I put input in and I got output.
Yeah, I
now know I can do that and that the thing works and that the base install works. The next thing from there is actually building up detailed guides. And so, this is the meat of the documentation. This is how you customize things a little bit more. It's a little bit more comprehensive.
Yeah, comprehensiveness is really the goal here. And one thing that I found just in my own research was that
this is where most documentation fails.
Yes, this is where documentation fails, and this is where books are really good, apparently.
Yeah, some books.
Yeah. Apparently, this is where books shine, is like detailed guides. The problem with books tends to be that the publishing cycle is too long. Like if you ever buy a book for version 1 of any Microsoft product, you might as well have just lit some cash on fire. Yeah, because it will be out of date before it hits the printing press. So don't even bother. Well, this is why I think there's been a big push for self-publication too.
Yeah, it's because it gets that it shortens the cycle. Now the next thing is more of a API reference. So it's like a breakdown of every single little endpoint that you can connect to, because some people are doing some really intricate stuff and they have to compose the pieces.
Exactly.
Effectively. And so that's like I said, it's complete reference. It's designed for users that have to look up exact arguments, how all the pieces fit together.
This isn't a how-to for APIs. This is
the assumption you know how.
Yes, exactly.
And you're trying to figure out what is congruent with what you're already trying to do. The next one is a cookbook. So it's like, if this, then do this.
Yes.
Some of the best stuff I read on this was actually the Ruby on Rails. There was I think David Hanselmeyer Hansen had a set of 2 books. It was like Rails recipes and advanced Rails recipes. It's like
I've seen those, yeah.
Yeah, but it was explaining how to do different things in Ruby on Rails. And it's very helpful. It's like, okay, I want to do this, and I want to have an entity that has a foreign key relationship to this other entity, and the UI will act right. How do I encode this in Ruby? Like I'm looking for A, here's B and C to make that happen.
Yeah, and this cookbooks are basically solutions to common problems. It could be several solutions to the same problem based on what you need it to do and kind of like individual preferences. And it's also examples of how the product can be used.
Well, it's intended to be a starting point for a particular solution. So it's a grimoire approach.
Yeah.
Effectively. And the last one is error messages, right?
Yeah.
Because
error messages
everybody's code has errors.
Well, error messages are documentation.
Yeah.
I read a great article just on that, and I put this in here because it was so good. One of the big points was give a reason for the error, at least at the bare minimum. Give a reference to look up the error.
Yeah, like what this actually means. Like if it's, error code, some globally unique identifier, an error has occurred, somebody's going to want to punch you in the face.
You know what? That's still better than...
Because I want to punch people in the face that do this that's regularly.
Hey, that's still better. At least you have an identifier. It's better than...
You would be surprised.
Error.
Because what happens is, it's better than flat out error, but what's great is when you look it up in Google and there's nothing.
Oh, wow.
And then it's just like, because now you wasted the time to actually look it up and you got nothing of value for doing that.
So Will's already ranted on Microsoft. Let me just say, Windows specific, DPC watchdog violation.
Yeah.
That's so annoying.
Or the ones where it's like you look at the event log and there's the error message and then there's the detail, and the detail is the error message expressed in XML format. That's hot. Let me tell you, that right there. That's trendy, man.
Yep.
It's like, this is the new way to make everybody hate you.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Okay, so...
Yeah, I would say I put in here a sample README format, and this is taken from writethedocs.org, and of course I'll have this in the show notes, but start off with an introduction and kind of state what problems your code solves.
Yeah, because this allows people to browse it quickly and go, okay, yeah, this meets my needs, this doesn't. I mean, I was looking at file parsing libraries today, and I went through about a dozen of them for C#, for doing delimited files, and, none of them solved my problem. And I was able to quickly ascertain that for about half of them.
And that's exactly what you want.
Yeah, but none of them solved my problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, that sucks, but the fact that you were able to know, it's...
I was able to eliminate, like, if somebody shouldn't be using your library, like, let them know quick and then go on.
Or if somebody, if this is what they're looking for, let them know up front, hey, this is the problem I solved.
And let Google know so they can find it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a pretty good sample. Beej is going to put that up. And it gets into a lot of, like usage of code. So
a good small sample of code. And I also put in here a table of contents for the rest of the README file.
You can click and you can get to what you're trying to get to instead of scrolling. And don't waste your user's time.
I've seen ones with it and I've seen ones without it. And
by the way, hot tip for software developers, most people suck at this. So Control F is your friend.
Yes.
Find keywords that you're looking for and go there. Because just because the person that wrote the docs is an idiot doesn't mean you have to be.
I use Control F all the time.
Yeah, because I'm
lazy.
Yeah, that's the easiest way to get to something. But anyway.
Next, you want to put in kind of the usage of the code and installation. Now, this is where I've seen a lot of README files fall short, is they say, this is the problem it solves, here's how to install it, and that's it.
Yeah.
All right. So you kind of
should magically know how it works, even though it's an impenetrable binary.
Yeah.
Because
so you kind of want to put.
Let me open my hex editor and figure out how your DLL works, you jerk.
Exactly. Exactly. You want to put at least some common API references, and this is where I go back to Hexo, especially the landscape theme. They have.
Yeah, they did pretty well on that.
The themes that I have written that I plan on putting out there for public consumption, I wrote my README files with theirs on one side, on one screen, and I was like, I wasn't copying exactly what they had because mine weren't the same, but I was copying the format because I liked going through their format, and I was like, I understand exactly what everything does.
Yeah.
And they didn't go into like super, super detail on their API, but
they gave you enough where you could.
It gave me enough, and it gave me access, like a link to where I could get more. And that's the next thing, is a link to a frequently asked questions. Hugely, hugely helpful. If you're not going to put it in the README, and I wouldn't really put it in the README file because you want to keep that shorter. Yeah. But just put a link to the FAQ.
And that way you can make it as long as it has to be and break it into sections and all that.
Oh, yeah.
So the next thing is, I do want to call out Python because this is something I noticed in their docs, is that they do tend to have a little bit of they're a little bit lighter, I guess, as far not that their docs are light, but that they're actually pleasant to read, because if you've watched a lot of Monty Python movies, there's a lot of good little laughs in there. They make fun of the Black Knight, that kind of stuff. And it adds an ambiance to it that really, it makes it smoother to deal with the stuff that they're doing, and you can remember things because you were told something that was humorous.
Well, I'll say this: I learned about that they had actual Monty Python references in their documentation. Yes. The guy was complaining about it.
There's always that guy, and as somebody that writes documentation, let me just tell you, that guy's not your audience.
No.
The fact is you shouldn't care about him at all.
Yeah, and the thing is, this guy he complains about it because he's like, if you're inside the click, you get the inside jokes. I'm like, it's a freaking movie, and so I have in the documents, WTFM, watch the effing movie. It's not like these guys have this inside joke from them being friends for 15 years like you and I have.
Yeah.
It's a movie that they all watch. You can go watch the movie and get the joke.
Go to Publix. There's a red box there. Buy some beer while you're there. Obviously, you're the sort of person who probably likes cheap beer.
Yeah.
So watch the movie.
Yeah. On your sample README files, or on your README files, put, have kind of a light conversational tone, but put in a link to kind of a code and issue trackers.
Yeah, so that people, when people get stuck, like, help them get unstuck and leave those documents on the web. Like, when you answer questions, that's still documentation. Like, if that lives on, then it's there. And somebody can find it and they don't bug you.
Also, put in information for potential contributors.
Yeah.
That's a big thing that I've noticed is, like, the documentation I noticed that's really good, it has, if you're interested in contributing to this, here's the GitHub repo, here's how to get in contact with us kind of thing. And finally, your project license. Either a link to it, or if it's like a simple license, throw that in there. And so I have listed under here don'ts, and number one under that is don't use auto-generated documentation.
Yeah. Well, do use it for searchability, but don't assume that it's docs.
That's good. I was wanting some better way to put that.
It's because it's indexable and people can find things. It's a point of entry into the documentation.
It makes it easier for people to get into there and find documentation on exactly what they're looking for. But like you said, it is not a substitution for documentation.
Yeah. And
don't substitute documentation for a poor interface.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And this can be an API interface as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So another thing is reviewing.
Yes.
Like, get somebody to edit. You are not capable. You're not any more capable of finding your grammar and logic errors and stuff that you just wrote than you are in finding the same in your code, because you're attached to it. Yeah.
Every single article that I read in preparation for this episode said to get an external editor.
Yeah. And,
good writers have good editors.
Yeah.
That's almost exactly from one of the blogs I read. But
this is why the majority of open source projects are, it's like somebody wrote a draft and said, okay, works on my box, publish to the entire internet.
Yeah.
Which is apparently what Windows Update is doing right now. But, that's not really it's not really a good strategy going forward unless you're $1 billion company and you can absorb some losses. Really a good strategy for them.
Part of the problem with that is you know what you meant to say.
Yeah, and you have an unconscious bias towards.
Yeah. And it's easy to skip typos or missing words or confusing meanings because you see what you meant to say, not what you actually said.
Yeah,
yeah, and that's why with our stuff, our emails and our show notes and our outlines,
like you'll run stuff by me, but a lot of times I don't have time to look at it. Mm-hmm. And what's bad is when something comes out and it goes through email and it's gone to everybody and their mother, and then I open it and I go, oh, you misspelled the.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do about that at that point because it's too late.
This is why you don't edit your own work, because I see TEH and see THE. And finally, the whole point of this, what got me, galvanized me to write the outline for this, is accessibility.
Yeah, because if people can't work their way up through the skill levels in your community, you will not have people to help you.
Yeah, exactly. And this goes to something that Rich Bowen from Red Hat said: welcoming people at whatever level they are and patiently helping them move up to the next level is how you build your community.
Yeah.
You need to make your software, your product, your hard work, what you've put all this effort into, usable by other people.
Yeah.
And
there's no point in building a civilization of one.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're going to go at some point and then you have ruins.
Password protected documentation prevents even approved users from best using your product.
Well, I mean, what's the point of that barrier?
Yeah.
Like, what are you getting from password protecting your docs?
Mm-hmm.
Probably nothing of actual value to you.
Yeah.
You're just punching yourself in the gut for no discernible reason. And what's the value? Like, is this actually getting you close to any other goal? I mean, it's not even so much about end user impact as it is about this is not congruent with what you're trying to do, apparently.
All right, I'm not going to say the name of the company that I had this issue with on the WordPress thing. I will say this.
Well, they're making a dumb mistake.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to call them out for it, but it's...
As a WordPress consultant, I will consult people not to purchase their product because of that.
Yeah.
Because it makes it harder for them to use the product. I will point them in the direction of other products that do not have that problem.
Well, yeah. I mean, that makes sense.
You know, as a consultant, that's what you're making me do. So you're losing revenue by doing that.
Well, and it's, you know, it's the fact that you're either going to point them away from it, or if you're unscrupulous, you're going to point them towards it so that you can consult. Like, neither of those is good for the end user. Like, they are literally erecting a moral hazard.
Yes.
And the avoidance of moral hazard is one of the deepest commitments you should have when you're building systems, because moral hazards is how systems fall.
Yeah, I like that. I want to close out with one final quote from Jacob Kaplan-Moss. And I really did enjoy his article. But that says, there's a particularly pernicious anti-pattern in documentation where tutorials are provided for free, but the real documentation is only available for purchase.
Yeah, it's the drug dealer model.
Yes, exactly.
We're going to get you hooked, and then we're going to take everything from you.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to think about why you want your business to be structured in this manner. Like, are you actually trying to help people, or are you just trying to asset strip them and go to the next one?
Well, it's a matter of, are you providing a valuable asset, or are you providing kind of a crappy asset that you make them jump through hoops to figure out how to use,
so that they're emotionally invested in it and can't leave? Like,
exactly.
Are you an abusive spouse? Like, are you analogous to an abusive spouse as a software developer?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, and that's exactly how I feel about password protected documentation on a WordPress theme.
Yeah, there's a significant amount of value to be gained in not setting people up so that Stockholm Syndrome is the only reason they stay.
Yeah. And I'll mention good products like Infragistics.
Yeah.
Their documentation is easily accessible.
Well, theirs and DevExpress and
Telerik,
those people, they've gotten where they've gotten because they've built their docs.
Yeah.
And because they've made it where it's like, hey, if you come with us, we're going to help you fall into the pit of success.
Exactly. And that's how I felt reading their documentation. And
whereas if you look at some, especially like Linux docs from 10 years ago,
yeah,
it's, there's a hill of success and you have to climb it.
Mm-hmm.
And what ends up happening is people don't make the trek to do it. Like, that's the reason that every year is going to be the year of desktop Linux, and it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because their system is not stable or not functional. It's because they don't make it where people can while they're trying to do other things.
Yeah.
And it's like there's a fundamental deep misunderstanding that your software is the end-all, be-all. And for most people, it's really not. It's an accessory that makes stuff happen.
Mm-hmm. That's really where this kind of rant episode came from. And so with that said, Will, what do you have for us for tricks of the trade?
Well, biggest thing is keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate anything that you don't have to overcomplicate. This is true of docs. This is true of the way you test things. This is true of system configuration. Like, I especially see this with configs. Is like, Microsoft is the worst for this. It's like, let's make everything configurable to the nth degree. But the guy that's trying to do things in whatever the most basic way is has to configure all the things to be able to get anything to work. It's the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. That's where, that's why Ruby on Rails absolutely cleaned house, 2005 to 2008 or so.
Yeah.
Like a whole lot of Microsoft-centric developers left and switched over to that platform because, hey, I could build a site without doing all this extra ceremony and this extra crap that isn't relevant to what I'm actually trying to do. Always keep things as simple as possible. No simpler than that, mind you, but keep it to the point where you can actually get things done.
Well, it seems like you would want to have the availability to go in and alter those configurations.
Yeah, have sensible defaults.
But have the defaults there to where... Yeah,
I mean, where I don't have to deal with random junk that's not relevant to the thing I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I want to build a house. Well, our houses require configuration because you might be building it in Antarctica on a glacier. And I'm like, I'm in Cozumel, Mexico. There's no glacier.
Yeah.
Why do I have to configure, that? This is just wrong. It's like this is a 0.0001% use case, and you're making me type something for that. Stop.
Yeah.
Let me give you a worldview. Assume that your end user is an impatient psychopath with a high-capacity magazine. In other words, I want to make this person not notice me so they don't shoot me in the face.
Yeah.
Now, what is my design decision from that?
Let's make the most simple, easy thing possible.
So that they don't notice you. Like you're in the background. Like that's where you should be as an engineer. If you're noticed as an engineer, you either are Tesla or you screwed up. There's nothing in the middle.
I love that. That is great. You're Tesla.
And you're probably not Tesla. It's like it's an ego thing that we have to sit there and go, oh, well, they may want to change this. Well, what percentage of the population actually wants to diddle around with this one thing?
If they want to change it, really, this is
give them the hooks to be able to do that, but don't ever make somebody do work that isn't relevant to what they're trying to do. There's a book about this. It's called Don't Make Me Think. Don't do that. Make systems that work and that are resilient with default configuration so that people can do the other thing that they're trying to do. Because more than likely, they're not trying to do an object relational mapper to a database. They're trying to get data out of the database to do something with that somebody pays them for. Don't waste their time. Keeping things simple enough where somebody can actually, think about people doing prototypes. If you have to spend 3 days putting crap in there that is completely irrelevant to what you're trying to do for a prototype, you're not going to make the prototype.
Exactly.
It's just...
I agree with you 100%.
It's a massive ego trip to, drop ego when you have consumers. It almost doesn't even matter what your interface is. When you have the ego that says the way that you interact with me is so important and it has to be just right, like I'm the Queen of England. Stop doing that as an API author. Just don't do that. That makes you a horrible person. I can't emphasize this enough because I've dealt with it my entire career. Never make other people think when they shouldn't have to.
Well, no. I mean, that's just common sense, but it's the kind of common sense that isn't common.
Well, I had a former boss that kind of drilled this into my head. He's like, assume that your user is a psychopath who's going to shoot people that tick him off. How do you write your code for that? Because that's how you avoid ticking off everybody else too. Because those other people don't notice you at all, and the psychopath goes, he's small potatoes compared to Microsoft, probably. Don't be the guy that makes other people's life harder.
Yeah.
So that's what I got. Keep it simple. Don't do the dumb.
If you have a question or comment for us, please email us at neckbeards@completedeveloperpodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed under Creative Commons. The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up to our email list, be sure and check out the website at www.completedeveloperpodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with news about the show. Thanks for listening. See you next time.